By 1916, industrialized artillery had turned the European landscape into a wasteland. Millions of men had already fallen, yet the front lines remained frozen. Armies were trapped in these trenches. For years, soldiers lived in cramped, muddy networks, offering little protection from disease or a direct shell hit. Traditional infantry tactics had reached a breaking point. Charging across no man's land meant sending men directly into machine gun fire, resulting in massive casualties for gains measured only in yards. Military leaders recognized that flesh and bone could no longer break this deadlock. They needed a technical solution that could cross the fire zone and protect the men inside it. Maintaining the status quo was no longer an option for either side. Both the Allies and the Central Powers began to invest heavily in experimental technologies, hoping a single superweapon could force a conclusion. The Allies pursued a land-based solution, the development of heavy armor designed to physically roll over trenches and crush defensive lines. Germany looked to the sea. They gambled on naval stealth, using submarines to bypass the army entirely and cut off vital supplies. These two paths represented a choice in how to win, but which technology actually tipped the balance of the war? The break the lines path was a tactical solution. It focused on the physics of the immediate battlefield, how to get men safely through the wire and across the mud. The starve the island path was strategic. It ignored the trenches in France to target the global supply chain, aiming to collapse a nation's economy from the outside. To understand which weapon mattered more, we need to look past their appearance and analyze the return on investment. What did these machines actually achieve compared to their ultimate cost? Germany's most radical move was the declaration of unrestricted submarine warfare. This meant sinking any merchant ship headed for Britain, regardless of its origin, to starve the island into a surrender. The weapon behind this blockade was the U-boat. These submarines could strike without warning, making them nearly impossible for supply ships to detect or avoid. The early results were devastating. Merchant ships traveling alone were defenseless against torpedoes, and shipping losses began to mount faster than they could be replaced. This chart shows the peak of the campaign in April 1917. U-boats sank 886,000 tons of shipping in a single month, an average of 17 ships every day. Because Britain was dependent on imported food, this disruption was a critical threat. Within months, the loss of these supplies pushed the population toward a genuine food crisis. As a tool for disrupting an empire's logistics, the U-boat was effective. It managed to cripple the supply chain that the Allied war effort relied on. But the U-boat's effectiveness came with a high operational cost. To remain hidden, commanders were forced to fire on sight without identifying their targets first. This lack of discrimination meant that neutral passenger ships were caught in the crossfire, leading to the deaths of civilians from countries not yet involved in the war. The most significant instance was the sinking of the Lusitania, a passenger liner carrying over 1,000 people, including many Americans. These civilian deaths created immense pressure on President Woodrow Wilson to abandon American neutrality. It provided the clear justification needed for the United States to join the Allies. Meanwhile, the Allies developed a tactical fix, the convoy system. By grouping merchant ships together under the protection of warships, they significantly reduced the number of ships a lone U-boat could successfully sink. The U-boat strategy eventually backfired. Its success in disrupting supplies triggered the entry of the United States, providing the Allies with a reserve of fresh troops and industrial output that Germany could not match. While Germany looked to the sea, the Allies deployed their first land ships at battles like the Somme and Cambrai. The early tank's primary role was to act as a shield. It was designed to flatten barbed wire and absorb machine gun fire, allowing the infantry to follow safely behind its armored plating. Their first appearance on the battlefield caused immediate panic among the defenders. Finally, there was a machine that could physically cross the trenches that had stopped every previous assault. However, these early designs were unreliable. The engines were prone to overheating, and the mechanical stress of crossing a cratered battlefield caused many to break down before they even reached the enemy. Tanks often became ditched or trapped in the mud, as seen here with the tank Hyacinth. When a machine stalled, it became a stationary target, often forcing the infantry to retreat and abandon any gains. Despite the intimidation they caused, The initial return on investment for the tank was low. They were simply too scarce and too fragile to have a meaningful impact on the wider war in 1916. The design didn't stay static. By 1918, the Allies had developed lighter, more agile tanks like the Renault FT, which were faster and far more mechanically sound than their predecessors. Success didn't just come from better hardware, but from a new military doctrine: combined arms. At the Battle of Amiens, the Allies synchronized hundreds of these new tanks with infantry, artillery, and aircraft. They no longer used the tank as a standalone novelty, but as a core part of a coordinated attack. The results were undeniable. Allied forces advanced 7 miles in a single day, a breach so significant that the German High Command referred to it as the Black Day of the German Army. This physical breakthrough shattered the morale of the defenders. Seeing their trench lines overrun led to the surrender of thousands of German soldiers in the final months of the conflict. By refining the technology through several failures, the tank eventually met its goal. It provided a way to overcome the wire and machine guns that had frozen the front for 4 years. We can plot these two technologies on a single matrix to see their true value. Early tanks sit in the bottom left. Their frequent mechanical failures meant they had little influence on individual battles or the war's overall strategy. By 1918, the tank had moved to the far right of the tactical axis. It was a primary tool for winning ground battles, even if it didn't change the war's higher-level political map. The U-boat sits at the top of the strategic axis for its impact on the global economy, but it carries a pulsing red indicator for the diplomatic blowback it created. On the tactical axis, it stays near zero. Sinking a cargo ship in the Atlantic didn't help an infantryman survive the machine guns in a trench. The contrast is clear. The tank changed how armies fought for a piece of ground, but the U-boat changed the list of who was actually fighting. The U-boat's influence was primarily strategic. By forcing the United States to end its neutrality, the submarine campaign shifted the war's resource balance, just as the major powers in Europe were reaching a state of total exhaustion. Bringing American industrial output and manpower gave the Allies a lead in resources Germany could not match, deciding the war's trajectory. The tank's success was confined to the tactical environment. It demonstrated that mobile armor could overcome the defenses that had paralyzed the infantry for years. By 1918, it provided a template for integrating armor and infantry that ended the era of static trench warfare, allowing armies to move and maneuver again. Both weapons teach a lesson about military technology. Context matters as much as raw performance. A weapon is only as effective as the secondary consequences it creates. In the end, the tank gave the Allies a way through the wire, but the U-boat gave them the millions of fresh soldiers needed to finish the fight.